There are moments in history when a single announcement stops a nation in its tracks. When it involves two princesses, one who has carried the weight of duty for over 5 decades, and one who is only just learning how to carry herself in public, the world does not simply pay attention. It holds its breath. It was not supposed to happen this way. That is what made it so extraordinary. In a monarchy built on careful planning, slow tradition, and the kind of ceremony that takes months to arrange, the announcement that rippled out of Windsor in the summer of 2025 caught almost everyone off guard. Not because it was scandalous, not because it was dramatic in the way tabloids love to manufacture, but because it was real, and it was tender, and it pointed directly at the future of the British monarchy in a way that no formal press release had ever quite managed to do before. To understand why what happened between Princess Anne and Princess Charlotte mattered so deeply to so many people across the United Kingdom and beyond, you have to go back, not just a few months, decades. You have to understand what Princess Anne built, what she sacrificed, and what she quietly decided she would one day pass on, not through inheritance, not through legal title, but through something far more personal. The way she lived her life in service, day after day, year after year, without ever asking anyone to notice. Princess Anne was born on August 15, 1950, the second child of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip. She arrived into a world that was still rebuilding after the Second World War, a world where Britain was clinging to its sense of identity, and its royal family was its most visible symbol of continuity. By the time Anne was 2 years old, her mother had become Queen Elizabeth II. That meant something enormous. It meant that Anne, almost from the moment she could walk, was not just a child. She was a symbol. She was a princess in the truest, most demanding sense of the word. And yet, even as a little girl, Anne resisted the idea of being treated like a porcelain figure in a cabinet. She was sharp, physically confident, and utterly uninterested in performing the softened, elegant version of royalty that the press seemed to want from her. She rode horses with the kind of fearlessness that made men twice her size nervous. She spoke her mind in rooms where people expected her to smile and nod. She was, in the best possible sense, difficult, and that difficulty was precisely what made her so effective. She became a working royal at 18, taking on official engagements in 1969, at a time when the role of a royal daughter was still largely ceremonial and decorative. Anne refused to let it stay that way. Over the following years, she accumulated patronages, charitable roles, and organizational commitments that would eventually run into the hundreds. She was particularly drawn to causes that received little glamour and asked for genuine, sustained effort. The Save the Children Fund, which she began working with in 1970, took her to some of the most difficult and impoverished places on Earth. She did not go for the photographs. She went because the work needed doing. In 1987, Queen Elizabeth II gave her daughter the title of Princess Royal, the 7th woman in British history to hold it. The title is not given automatically. It is not inherited. It belongs to the eldest daughter of the monarch, and it can only be held by one person at a time. It is held for life. When Princess Anne received it, she became part of an extremely small sisterhood of women who had carried this honor. And she wore it the way she wore everything, without fuss, without fanfare, and with an unmistakable sense of responsibility. For nearly 4 decades after that, Princess Anne remained the Princess Royal, through the death of her mother, through the reign of her brother, through injuries, through controversies, through a world that changed almost beyond recognition around her. In 2024, age 74, she sustained a concussion and minor injuries in a horse-related incident at her home at Gatcombe Park. She was briefly hospitalized. Royal watchers assumed she might slow down. They were wrong. By the end of that year, she had still logged more official engagements than almost any other working royal. In 2025, that figure reached 478, a number that speaks not to ambition, but to something closer to calling. That context is essential to understanding what the announcement involving Princess Charlotte meant, and why it sent shockwaves not just through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, but through living rooms and office kitchens across the entire country. Because when the story began to emerge, when people started putting the pieces together, what they realized was that this was not simply news about a title or a formal designation. It was news about a relationship, about mentorship, about the quiet, deliberate way that Princess Anne, the hardest-working royal the British family had produced in living memory, had been preparing a 10-year-old girl to one day carry something she herself had carried for most of her life. Princess Charlotte of Wales was born on May 2, 2015, the second child of Prince William and Princess Catherine. She was the first female royal in the direct line of succession who would not be bumped down by the birth of a younger brother. That change, that historic shift in the laws of succession, happened because of reforms introduced under Queen Elizabeth II, reforms that meant Charlotte's position in the line would remain above that of Prince Louis, regardless of his gender. She was, from birth, a princess in a genuinely new mold. She was also, as she grew older, something that nobody in the royal family had quite anticipated, a miniature reflection of Princess Anne. The comparisons began early and kept building. Royal commentators noticed that Charlotte kept her brothers in line at public engagements in much the same way that Anne had managed her own siblings, with a quiet, almost instinctive authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than instruction. She was described as feisty, as sharp, as a child with the kind of emotional intelligence that went well beyond her years. One royal commentator told Hello magazine that Charlotte reminded him directly of the Princess Royal, a strong character, able to command rooms she had barely entered. But none of that was what made the announcement so striking. What made it striking was what came before it, what had been happening quietly and consistently in the months and years leading up to the moment when the world finally sat up and took notice. Because it turned out that Princess Anne had not simply been watching Charlotte from a distance and approving of what she saw. She had been actively involved. She had been talking to her, guiding her, teaching her in the only way that Anne had ever really taught anything, which was by doing it alongside the person who needed to learn. Insiders who spoke to royal correspondents described a relationship that had grown far beyond what anyone might have expected from the age gap between them. Anne, at 75, and Charlotte, at 10, had forged something genuine, not performative, not arranged for public consumption. They were reported to talk regularly about sports, about animals, about the responsibilities that come with a life lived in public, about what it means to show up even when you do not particularly feel like it. And when the formal announcement finally came, when the words were spoken and the nation began to process what they meant, the most striking reaction was not disbelief. It was recognition. People who had been watching these two women, one at the end of a long career of service, one at the very beginning, realized they had seen this coming. They simply had not known what to call it. The title of Princess Royal cannot be transferred. It cannot be given while Princess Anne still holds it. That is the law. It has been the law for centuries. But what can be given, what was being given in the slow, careful way that real traditions are built, was something else entirely. It was the mantle, the understanding, the deep, earned knowledge of what it actually costs to be the woman in the room who keeps showing up. And so the story that shook the United Kingdom in 2025 was not, in the end, a story about ceremony or protocol or the mechanics of royal title. It was a story about two princesses, one who had spent a lifetime building something remarkable and quiet and real, and one who was only just beginning to understand what she had inherited, not legally, not officially, but in the truest sense that the word inheritance has ever carried. The passing of something essential from one person to another, across the years, in the moments when nobody was watching. The nation would spend the days that followed arguing about what it meant. The newspapers would offer their various interpretations. The social media timelines would fill with celebration and analysis and the occasional raised eyebrow. But underneath all of it, there was something most people seemed to feel rather than say, a quiet recognition that in this royal family at this particular moment, something had shifted. Something had been decided. And the woman who had decided it most clearly was the one who had never, in 75 years of public life, been interested in being dramatic about anything at all. There is a particular kind of education that no school can provide. It does not happen in classrooms. It does not arrive through books or lectures or carefully structured lessons. It happens in the middle of a crowd, when the noise is too loud and the cameras are too close, and the person next to you is watching not to check that you are doing the right thing, but to remind you by their presence that it is possible to do it at all. Princess Charlotte has been receiving that kind of education for several years now, and the teacher, whether the world noticed it or not, has been Princess Anne. To understand how this mentorship developed, it helps to understand what Charlotte's early public life actually looked like. She attended her first major royal engagement, the Trooping the Color, as a very small child. And from the beginning she handled herself with a composure that surprised royal watchers who had expected fidgeting and distraction. She stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and looked out at the crowds with something that was not quite seriousness and not quite excitement, but a careful mixture of both. Even then, observers noted that she seemed to be processing the experience rather than simply enduring it. As she got older, Charlotte's public appearances became more frequent and more revealing. At school events, at Christmas services, at Wimbledon, where she attended with her mother in 2025 and showed herself to be a genuinely passionate tennis fan, she consistently demonstrated an emotional register that felt more deliberate than accidental. She knew when to smile. She knew when to be still. She knew most impressively when to step back and let the moment breathe rather than pushing herself into its center. These are not instincts that arrive naturally in children. They are learned. They are absorbed from watching people who have spent decades getting it right. Princess Anne's influence on Charlotte has been described by multiple royal insiders as something that goes well beyond the casual affection of an extended family. The two are reported to share a specific kind of bond, rooted in temperament, in the shared experience of being second-born daughters in households dominated by future kings, and in a mutual recognition that neither of them has ever been particularly interested in performing softness for an audience that expects it. Anne kept her brothers in check. Charlotte keeps hers. The parallel has been noted so many times, by so many different observers, that it has moved well beyond coincidence into something more like pattern. What made the 2025 announcement land with such force was precisely this background, the accumulated weight of everything the public had already half understood, but never quite heard confirmed out loud. When royal correspondents reported that Anne and Charlotte had been in regular, meaningful contact, talking about everything from women's football to horses to the practical demands of public service, it was not surprising. It was clarifying. It gave a name and a structure to something people had been sensing for years. Princess Anne turned 75 in August 2025, and the birthday was marked with a level of public affection that would have been remarkable for any public figure, let alone one who has spent most of her career pointedly refusing to court it. King Charles's office posted a tribute on the royal family's official Instagram account that described her as having one of the busiest working schedules of any member of the royal family, noting her significant ongoing relationships with charities and organizations across the Commonwealth. The post was celebrated by royal fans who flooded the comments with messages calling her a trooper, a national treasure, and one of the most genuinely committed public servants Britain had ever produced. The numbers backed that up. In 2025, Princess Anne completed 478 official engagements, a figure that represented a 10% increase from the 457 she had managed in 2024, the year she sustained a concussion and was briefly sidelined. Even King Charles, who surpassed her tally that year with 532 appearances, acknowledged the extraordinary nature of her commitment. When she appeared at a charities forum held at Buckingham Palace to mark her birthday, she made a rare joke at her brother's expense, telling the assembled crowd that she was very fortunate that His Majesty had allowed her to use the palace for the event, adding with characteristic dry precision, "I need to say that it does help." The crowd laughed. Anne smiled in the particular way she smiles when she is enjoying herself and does not especially want anyone to make a fuss about it. That moment, small, warm, self-deprecating, captured something essential about Princess Anne that the public announcement about Charlotte would later illuminate from a different angle. Anne has never been interested in the ceremonial performance of emotion. She is interested in the actual doing of things. She shows up, she works, she occasionally makes a dry joke, and then she goes home and gets ready to show up again the next day. It is not glamorous. It is not the stuff of fairy tales. But it is, in the longest view, the thing that has made her the most trusted and respected member of the royal family for the better part of 5 decades. And it is precisely this quality, this consistent, unspectacular commitment to actual service, that she appears to have been quietly transmitting to Princess Charlotte, not through speeches, not through formal instruction, but through the accumulation of small moments of conversations, of showing a 10-year-old girl that the job is not about looking right for the camera. It is about knowing why you are there. The question of what Charlotte will eventually become has been discussed in royal circles for years. She is the first female royal in the direct line of succession to be protected by reformed succession laws, meaning her position above Prince Louis is legally guaranteed regardless of his gender. She is the daughter of the future king, and when William eventually ascends to the throne, Charlotte will be the eldest daughter of the monarch, which makes her eligible for the first time to receive the title of Princess Royal once Anne is no longer with us. That cannot happen while Anne is alive. The title is held for life, but the preparation for it, the shaping of a young woman who could carry its meaning with the same weight that Anne has carried it, appears to have been quietly underway for some time already. Royal commentators who have followed Charlotte closely note that she has already begun to demonstrate the qualities that define a genuine working royal, rather than a ceremonial one. At Wimbledon in July 2025, she sat alongside her father William and European royalty, including Crown Princess Leonor of Spain at the Women's Euro final, cheering on England with the kind of unguarded enthusiasm that reminded people she is still a child, while simultaneously carrying herself with a poise that reminded them she is something else as well. She debuted lighter hair that day, a small, personal change that the tabloids noted breathlessly, but that meant nothing compared to the larger story quietly assembling itself around her. She is growing up with what one royal analyst described as a sense of responsibility that is rare in children her age. Because Charlotte is the first princess to hold a position above a living brother in the line of succession, she has spent her entire life understanding, in some instinctive way, that her role is not merely decorative. That weight, which might have crushed someone with less natural confidence, appears instead to have focused her. She has her mother's warmth and her great-aunt's spine. It is a combination that the monarchy genuinely needed, even if nobody had formally planned for it. The announcement that shook the country when it came was both about the future and about the past. It was about a 75-year-old woman who had spent a lifetime building something worth handing on, and a 10-year-old girl who had, without entirely understanding it yet, already begun to receive it. It was about the particular, irreplaceable nature of example, of what it means to watch someone do a hard thing with dignity, and to decide, in the quiet of your own heart, that you want to be able to do that too. But the full force of the announcement, what it meant for the monarchy, for the public, and for the two women at its center, had not yet made itself completely clear. That would come in the days that followed, as Britain sat with the news and began to understand not just what had been said, but why it had been said now. Why this moment? Why these two? And what, for a family that had seen so much turbulence in recent years, it was actually asking the country to believe about its future. The answer, when it arrived, was quieter than anyone expected. And it changed the way a great many people thought about what the monarchy was actually for. In the days after news of the announcement began to spread, something unusual happened in Britain. The conversation did not divide the way these conversations usually do. There was no clean split between those who celebrated and those who criticized, no tribal argument along predictable lines. Instead, there was something closer to a collective pause, a shared moment of processing, as people tried to articulate why the story of Princess Anne and Princess Charlotte felt so different from the royal news that had dominated headlines for the previous several years. The recent history of the British royal family had not been without difficulty. The departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the illness of King Charles, the cancer treatment of Princess Catherine, these had been years of genuine strain for a family that conducts much of its struggle in full view of a world that is simultaneously fascinated and exhausted by the spectacle. Against that backdrop, what the announcement seemed to offer was something the public had been quietly hungry for without knowing quite how to ask for it. Not drama, not crisis managed in real time, but continuity, the sense that something good was being built and handed on. To understand why that mattered, it helps to think carefully about what Princess Anne represents to people who have watched her work across half a century. She is not beloved in the way that Princess Diana was beloved, with an intensity that was inseparable from grief and longing and projection. Anne is beloved in a different register entirely. She is beloved the way a reliable institution is beloved, not because she makes your heart ache, but because she has never once let you down. Because you know that wherever there is a difficult thing that needs doing, she will go and do it without expecting a standing ovation. That kind of steadiness is, in its way, a more radical form of service than any amount of glamour could manage. The announcement about Charlotte did not suggest that Charlotte would be Anne's replacement in any literal sense. How could it? Anne is irreplaceable in the specific, personal way that all extraordinary individuals are irreplaceable. What it suggested instead was that Charlotte was being prepared, gently, deliberately, and with genuine care, to understand what service actually requires of a person, what it takes from you, what it gives back, and why it is worth the cost even when the cost is considerable. The title of Princess Royal has only been bestowed 7 times in the history of the British monarchy. The requirement is precise. The eldest daughter of the reigning monarch granted the title at the monarch's discretion. Princess Anne received it in 1987 from her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, nearly 2 decades into her career as a working royal. It is held for life, which means it cannot pass to Charlotte while Anne is living. But when the time comes, when William is king, and Anne's long, extraordinary chapter has finally closed, Charlotte will be positioned as she has never quite been before. Not just a princess, the eldest daughter of the monarch, the one who carries a title that only 6 women before her have ever held in the entire recorded history of the country. Whether she will accept it when that day comes is her choice. That, too, is part of the story, the fact that in the reformed, modern understanding of what royalty means, Charlotte will be able to choose. But the preparation Anne has been providing is not preparation for a title. It is preparation for the years of work that make the title meaningful. The hundreds of engagements, the charity visits to unglamorous places, the early mornings and late evenings and missed occasions and relentless, cheerful discipline of showing up for people who need you to show up. Charlotte's public profile has already begun to reflect that preparation in small but significant ways. At Wimbledon in 2025, sitting alongside William and crowned Princess Leonor of Spain at the Women's Euro final in Switzerland, she showed exactly the combination of personal enjoyment and public composure that Anne has embodied across a career spanning decades. She cheered. She engaged. She did not perform. There is a difference, and it is legible to anyone who has spent any time watching how real working royals conduct themselves versus how people who are merely playing the role tend to behave. Charlotte, at 10, already knew the difference. Royal commentator Phil Dampier, speaking about Charlotte's growing public persona, described her as having a maturity that goes well beyond her years, a kind of emotional intelligence that makes her not just Anne's spiritual successor, but something rarer and more interesting, a young woman who is already learning to carry difficulty with grace. Dampier noted that Charlotte had been a particular source of strength for her mother, Princess Catherine, during the Princess of Wales's cancer treatment in 2024. "She has been a great source of strength," he said, words that sound simple but describe something that is, in reality, genuinely demanding of a child who is still growing into herself. When Princess Catherine announced in January 2025 that she was in remission, Charlotte's role in the family's recovery was one of the quieter stories that sat behind the more public news. She had not been asked to perform stoicism for the cameras. She had simply, by all accounts, been present, consistently, calmly, in the way that people who have watched Princess Anne work for decades would immediately recognize as the thing that actually matters. Not the grand gesture, the daily showing up. The reaction across Britain to the announcement about Anne and Charlotte was shaped by all of this accumulated context. Social media responded with the kind of genuine warmth that is different from manufactured trending, people writing not about what they thought they were supposed to feel, but about what they actually felt. Pride, mostly, and something close to relief. The sense that whatever else the monarchy was working through, whatever else the news would bring in the months and years ahead, there were people inside it who were doing the real work of making sure it meant something. There were some, inevitably, who questioned the timing, who asked whether it was appropriate to speak of a 10-year-old's future role in such specific terms, who worried about the pressure that public expectation places on children who did not choose the lives they were born into. These were fair questions, and they deserved honest answers. Princess Charlotte did not ask to be born into the royal family. She did not ask to have her development discussed in newspapers and on television programs by people who have never met her. Nobody in her position ever does. The best the adults around her can do, the best Anne can do, the best William and Catherine can do is ensure that whatever she is being prepared for, she is being prepared for it with love, with honesty, and with the absolute freedom to eventually decide for herself what she wants it to mean. By all accounts, that is exactly what is happening. The relationship between Anne and Charlotte has not been constructed for public consumption. It has not been arranged as a narrative. It developed because two people with genuinely similar temperaments found each other in the specific, confined world they both inhabit and recognized something familiar. A shared set of values, a shared instinct about what a life of service actually requires. A shared sense of humor that is dry and warm and entirely unimpressed by the very pageantry that surrounds them both. Princess Anne is 75 years old. She has given more of herself to public service than almost anyone alive in Britain today, more total engagements, more sustained commitment, more decades of uninterrupted work. She has survived things that would have broken others. The kidnapping attempt at 24, the scrutiny that has followed her throughout her adult life, the losses and transitions and reinventions of an institution that has had to change almost faster than it could manage. She has come through all of it without losing the essential quality that makes her remarkable: the refusal to let difficulty become an excuse for doing less than is required. Princess Charlotte is 10 years old. She is learning. She is watching. She is absorbing in the particular way that children absorb things, not through formal instruction but through proximity, through example, through the slow accumulation of understanding that happens when someone you respect shows you, repeatedly and without drama, how a hard thing is done. She is growing up in a family that has known genuine hardship in recent years and has emerged from it, imperfectly but honestly, still committed to the idea that public service matters, that showing up matters, that the work, however unglamorous, is worth doing. The announcement that sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom was not in the end about a title. Titles come and go. People hold them and eventually release them, and the world moves on. What the announcement was really about, what it pointed toward in the most essential sense, was the transmission of something that no formal designation can fully capture. The understanding that the job is not about you, that the role is not about the recognition it brings, that the only thing that justifies a life spent in public service is whether, at the end of it, the service was actually rendered. Princess Anne understood that at 18. She has lived it every day since. And somewhere in the ongoing, unscripted conversation between a 75-year-old princess and a 10-year-old one, about horses and football and manners and the practical, sometimes uncomfortable demands of caring for the world beyond your own walls, that understanding is passing from one generation to the next, quietly, without ceremony, in the only way things that actually matter have ever been transmitted. Britain noticed, and for a country that had grown accustomed to watching its monarchy navigate crisis, it turned out that this particular story of patience and preparation and the deliberate, loving handing on of something hard and real was exactly the one it had needed to hear.